Alright, let's talk about Mali. Now, I don't just mean the landlocked country sitting in the middle of West Africa today. I mean the whole story. Because this place, it's got one of the most fascinating histories on Earth. And it all starts with a lion. Well, sort of. Around 1240 CE, a man named Sundiata Keita, nicknamed the Lion King, seized the former capital of the Ghana Empire and started building something extraordinary. He defeated King Sumahoro Kantai of the Soso Kingdom at the Battle of Kirina, and with that victory, united a collection of smaller Mahlinkai kingdoms along the upper Niger River. What came of that was the Mali Empire, which some might argue was one of the greatest civilizations West Africa has ever seen. But here's the thing, Sundiata wasn't just a military guy. He actually set up a functioning government and established laws. He basically ruled until 1255, and under his reign, Mali saw peace, prosperity, and genuine freedom for its people. After Sundiata, leadership passed through several rulers, like his son Wahli, then Wati, Khalifa, Abu Bakr, each one keeping the empire moving forward, but none of them would leave a mark quite like the man who came next. Mansa, Musa I. Reigning from 1312 to 1337, Mansa Musa was, by some estimates, the wealthiest human who ever lived. Although we wouldn't know that because for most of his reign, the outside world had absolutely no idea that he existed. So yes, Mali was rich, obscenely rich, in fact, but no one had any clue just how much. If you're scratching your head right now, wondering just how they reached that level of wealth, I'll tell you. See, Mali was sitting right at the crossroads of trans-Saharan trade routes. It was taxing everything that passed through, trading its legendary gold and salt deposits with Europe and North Africa. But mostly it was a local secret. Then came 1324. Mansa Musa decided to make his pilgrimage to Mecca, and he didn't exactly travel light. He brought hundreds of kilograms of gold with him, a royal entourage of thousands, and along the way, he just gave it all away. To every city, every ruler, every person he passed. He was so generous that Egypt's economy took 12 years to recover from the sudden gold surplus he dropped on it. Then, naturally, word spread fast. Stories of this impossibly wealthy African king reached Europe, and Spanish cartographer Abraham Cresques actually painted Mansa Musa into the Catalan Atlas, one of the most important maps of the era. On the map you'll see him seated on a throne, golden crown on his head, a nugget of gold in his hand. Of course, it made people curious, so much so that European explorers even started dreaming about finding Timbuktu, which they thought was his legendary city of riches. And yes, Timbuktu was legendary, just maybe not in the way the explorers imagined. Because what Mansa Musa built there wasn't just wealth. More than anything, it was knowledge. He brought back Muslim architects, scholars, and books from Mecca. In 1327, the Jinga Mosque was built. Then came the Sankohrai Madrasa, which became one of the finest universities in the Islamic world and housed the largest library on the entire African continent. Eventually, Timbuktu became a global centre of learning, a multilingual, multi-ethnic hub of Islamic scholarship that attracted students from across the known world. But sadly, Mansa Musa died around 1337, and that's when things started to unravel. Because without strong leadership, the empire began cracking from the inside. I mean, the royal family turned on itself, fighting civil wars over succession through the 1400s. Meanwhile, new trade routes opened up through rival kingdoms, and European and North African merchants started looking elsewhere for gold. So the empire that had once controlled the economic heartbeat of an entire continent was slowly bleeding out. And by the late 15th century, the Songye Empire had swallowed up most of Mali's territory. After that, a Moroccan army arrived in 1591 and practically dismantled Songye simply because the Songye didn't have firearms. As you can imagine, political chaos followed. The Moroccans either exiled or executed Timbuktu's scholars, scattered its libraries, and disrupted the very trade networks that had made this region thrive for centuries. And the last Mansa, Mahmud IV, died in 1610. With him, the Mali Empire was gone. You'd think that what came after was utter silence, right? Well, that would be wrong. The 19th century brought French colonial expansion pushing in from Senegal, Islamic jihads, reshaping political borders, and eventually, a long road toward an independence that would come with its own complicated story. But that's for another video. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below. For now, let's shift gears a little bit and see where all this history happened. Mali sits deep in West Africa. It's located north of the equator and stretches all the way up to the Tropic of Cancer. And yeah, as I briefly mentioned a few minutes ago, this country is landlocked. It shares borders with 7 other nations. No coastline, no ocean access, just land in every direction. But as you'll see in a bit, that geographical reality has shaped pretty much everything about Mali. Take its size, for example. Back when it was just an empire, Mali controlled territory, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to Lake Chad. That's like 1.1 million square kilometres, or about 440,000 square miles, which, don't get me wrong, was already massive at the time. But today, modern Mali covers about 1.24 million square kilometres, or nearly 500,000 square miles, making it the largest country in West Africa. Of course, you can't see its wonders all in one go, but you're more than welcome to give it a try. So if you want to book your next excursion here, I've linked all the travel essentials you need in the description below. Before you do that though, one of the most important things you need to understand about Mali's geography is that it's essentially split into 3 distinct zones, stacked on top of each other. And yes, each one tells a completely different story. Let's start in the south. That's where the Sudanese savannah is. So picture lush, tropical, wooded grasslands that are somewhat interrupted by cliffs and dramatic rock formations. This makes up the green part of Mali, which is sustained thanks to 2 major river systems, namely the Niger and the Senegal. That's why farming here is possible. And not only that, it's also where communities can actually put down roots. That said, here's a fun fact for you. This is where the empire's agricultural backbone was built. But you probably could have guessed that already. As you move north from there, the landscape changes into the Sahel. The word Sahel actually comes from the Arabic word for shore, which basically sums up this entire area. It's the shore of the desert, also known as the traditional zone where the green south gradually gives way to something much harsher, something called semi-arid steppes. If you're not familiar with what these are, simply put, they're dry sandy plains with sparse trees and shrubby bushes. There are also vast plateaus broken up by isolated rocky masses. And within those, you've got 2 features that really stand out. 1, the rock buttes of Hombori. 2, the Bandia Gahra escarpment, which is a sandstone cliff stretching about 150 kilometres or about 93 miles. It's mostly famous for being the home to the Dogon people, which I'll introduce you to later on, so stick around for that. In the meantime, let's head further north where the Sahara begins. You know about the Sahara, right? It covers the largest portion of Mali, and yes, it's exactly what you're picturing in your head. Hot, barren sand dunes everywhere, rocky outcroppings, and almost no vegetation except the occasional patch of thorn bush. So it's no surprise that the Sahara is the largest hot desert in the world, covering over 3.5 million square miles. That's roughly 9 million square kilometres. Because of this, people often refer to it as the Sea of Sand. And honestly, seeing it, that description feels pretty accurate. And somewhere beneath all that sand, believe it or not, lies one of Africa's misunderstood economies. See, Mali's economy is one of those stories where the numbers on paper don't quite tell the full picture. And understanding the reason behind why that gap exists is one of the most interesting parts of this video. Okay, let's start with the basics. According to the World Bank, Mali's official GDP in 2024 was about $26.59 billion US. And the GDP per capita, which is like the average economic output per person, is projected at around $1,137 US for 2026. Now that puts Mali at roughly the 19th poorest country in the world, but here's where it gets interesting. So, that World Bank figure, that's grossly underselling what's happening in reality. Because an organisation known as World Economics estimates Mali's true GDP in 2025 at around $119 billion US. Plus their initial forecast for 2026 pushes it towards $126 billion US. That's nearly double the official estimate. So what's with the gap? 2 big reasons really. First, Mali's informal economy. It's estimated that about 35% of all economic activity happens completely outside the formal sector, meaning a lot of it's not being tracked, taxed, or accounted for. Second, Mali's still using a GDP base year that's 26 years old, which, if you think about it, is kind of like navigating 2026 with a map from the year 2000. It leads to a serious underestimation of how much the economy has actually grown. But despite this, it still stands that Mali is considered poor by global standards. So the question now is, how are they surviving? Well, agriculture is the backbone, especially their cotton and livestock. In fact, Mali is actually one of Africa's largest cotton producers, and the sector employs a huge portion of the rural population. But I gotta tell you, that success and dependence on agriculture, it's a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, yes, it's funding the country. On the other hand, though, it's a major vulnerability. When droughts hit, and in a country that's part desert and part semi-arid steppe, droughts do hit. The economy feels it immediately. So what's the backup plan here? If you remember our history section, Mali Empire was pretty big on gold. To this day, Mali is still one of the top gold-producing countries in Africa, which is why mining accounts for a significant chunk of export revenue. And sure, that sounds like a huge advantage, but don't forget, reality is a whole other story. Because despite sitting on enormous natural resources, Mali hasn't been able to fully convert that wealth into broad economic development. Want to know why? 3 things: corruption, crumbling infrastructure, and persistent political instability. But numbers only tell you so much, and with Mali, the real story has always lived somewhere deeper than a spreadsheet. It lives in their culture, which, simply put, was built at a crossroads. For over 1,000 years, traders, scholars, pilgrims, and merchants moved through this land from every direction, carrying not only gold and salt, but as we've seen earlier, ideas, beliefs, languages, and traditions. That constant flow of people and exchanges in ideas are exactly why Mali is the way it is. And today, Mali is home to more than 20 ethnic groups. The Bambara are the largest, followed by the Fulani, Soninkai, Songhi, and Dogon, among others. Each of them has its own completely distinct traditions, crafts, and ways of life. The Dogon, for example, build their villages directly into the cliffs of the Bandiagara escarpment and perform ceremonial dances with over 80 unique masks. Then there's the Tuareg, or the so-called Blue Men of the Desert. Funny story, they actually received that nickname because they would use indigo dye to colour their clothing, and that literally stained their skin. Next, the Fulani. Every December they hold the crossing of the cattle at Jafarabai, where thousands of livestock and their herders swim across the Niger River together, while families reunite on the banks. It's quite a sight to behold, and no doubt an interesting tradition to practice. Which, speaking of traditions, there's another one you need to know about, the griot tradition, or Jehliyu. This time, living historians carry the memory of entire kingdoms through song, playing the kora, a 21-string harp lute. That eventually gave birth to Ahmadu and Mariam, a blind couple from Bamako, who composed the official song for the 2006 World Cup. They performed at the 2024 Paris Olympics closing ceremony and once played for Barack Obama at his Nobel Peace Prize concert in 2009. Clearly, for a country the world mostly overlooks, Mali has a habit of quietly shaping it. So, out of everything you've learned about this West African country so far, what's been your favourite new discovery? I'd love to know your thoughts, so let me know down below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.